Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us. This is the third in our four-part series, spring webinar series put on by the Field Naturalist and Ecological Planning Alumni Association. We're affiliated with the UVM Field Naturalist Program. The Field Naturalist Program is a graduate program at the University of Vermont that has recruited students with the moxie to break new environmental ground since 1983. And put simply, the mission of the program is to develop a new generation of conservation leaders. Graduates are sought after leaders in stewardship, conservation, policy, ecological planning, and place-based education. And whether they work in boardrooms, bogs, or botanical gardens, field naturalists stand out as holistic problem solvers. Over 90% of alumni of the program have careers in the environmental field, and nearly half go on to lead major conservation initiatives in public, private, or nonprofit organizations. We're approaching 40 years of the Field Naturalist Program, and it was just a couple years ago that we realized that with alumni working in 30 states and 7 countries, we have a yet pretty much unexplored opportunity to strengthen this network of conservation practitioners around the world. We formed the Alumni Association in 2017 with the goal of reconnecting these individuals to one another and to their work. Our hope is that by building this alliance of modern conservation practitioners, that we can encourage collaboration to confront the environmental challenges of our time. Since we started, we've organized conferences and gatherings in Vermont, but it took this global pandemic to force us out of our comfort zone and into the digital sphere. And while we're sad that we're not gathering in person in Vermont this year, we're also glad to have this opportunity to feature the work of our alumni around the country who might not travel to Vermont for this event. Tonight is the third presentation in our new spring webinar series. Tonight we're going to hear from Katherine Hale from Durham, North Carolina, and we also hope you'll be able to join us next Tuesday for our fourth and final webinar with Jesse Griffin of the Oregon chapter of the Nature Conservancy. So Katherine Hale, as I said, is from Durham, North Carolina. She was up north in Vermont from 2015 to 2017 as a member of the Field Naturalist Program, and she's now back where she started. Hailing from the North Carolina Piedmont, Katherine is hard at work growing more plants and transforming her old farmhouse and surrounding environs into a diverse, sustainable landscape that mimics naturally occurring ecosystems. In her words, she writes about natural history for love and money. And when she's working, she's the marketing and communications assistant at the Sarah P. Duke Gardens in Durham, North Carolina. So for those of you calling in, if you're available and able, we encourage you to turn your cameras on so that Katherine can see your smiling faces as she presents. If that doesn't work for you, that's just fine. And then at the end, we'll all turn our cameras on and have a conversation with any questions you may have for Katherine. So now I'm going to turn it over to Katherine for her presentation.
All right. So today I want to talk to you about some of my adventures in plant propagation. Specifically bald cypresses and dawn redwoods, one of which is very common and one of which is very rare. And I want to talk about the implications of this for the field of conservation horticulture. And so I guess I want to start off with talking about what is conservation horticulture. So conservation horticulture means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but for me it's very simple. It's when you take conservation, i.e. preserving plants and ecosystems, and you take horticulture, humans growing them, and you put the two together. One of the things that I like about conservation horticulture is that it can scale at a lot of different levels and be practiced by a lot of different organizations and individuals, and that projects can be customized to what people are looking for. So although conservation horticulture is often practiced by large botanic gardens and zoos and other conservation organizations, it can also be practiced by individuals. So having a space in your yard that's for native plants or something like that is also conservation horticulture. One of the examples that I wanted to show of what conservation horticulture can look like is this patch of Sarracenia rubra, which is a rare southern pitcher plant from the Appalachian Mountains growing at the North Carolina Botanical Gardens. And I don't know about you, but this is a lot of pitcher plants to me. I look at this and I think, wow, so many pitcher plants, and I didn't even have to tramp through a bog to do it. This is what the bed looks like, wide scale, to give context. And there are 4 or 5 of these with different pitcher plants representing different natural communities. And it's spring right now, so most of the other plants haven't grown in, but in the summer, there are a lot of different species that you would find in these natural communities mixed in with the pitcher plants. And this is from last April, April 2019. But conservation horticulture can also look more naturalistic. So like these, Sarracenia flava growing at a preserve in coastal Virginia. So, you know, sometimes it looks very formal, and then other times not so much. But often conservation horticulture looks like this. This is a shot I took when I was visiting the Meadowview Biological Research Station near Fredericksburg, Virginia. They specialize in growing and preserving pitcher plants. And what I like about this shot is it shows a lot of things you'll see at conservation horticulture. So most prominently, there's the fence to keep out unwanted mammals. There's the greenhouse to the left where plants are propagated. And then you have the beds surrounding it where pitcher plants are being grown. And these plants are not only used for this organization's own preserves, but they're also available for sale to the general public. So if you want to have a pitcher plant bog of your own on your deck or your patio or whatever, you can. You can buy them legally. These are nursery propagated. Wild plants are not harmed. And I think this is great because one way to get people to care about these plants is for them to actually have hands-on experience with them. And again, without having that hands-on experience come at the expense of wild plants and wild populations. But like I said, if I had to summarize all the buzzwords into just one sentence, I would say that conservation horticulture to me means growing more plants. And you know, in order to have these restoration projects and to have these displays, you need to have the plants to do it. So where do they come from? They come from nurseries. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today about. So for the past year and a half, I have been spending 1 day a week at the North Carolina Botanical Garden in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, working with the propagation teams there, and they grow a wide variety of southeastern native plants for sale to the general public. There's also a conservation arm of the Botanic Gardens that focuses on plants for their own restoration projects, but we're mostly geared at species for the general public that are well suited to gardens in our area. And last spring, we were going through the collections of, you know, sort of looking at seeing the nursery and seeing, well, okay, what's come up, what's going on. And we noticed there was only one bald cypress seedling, and you can see that on the left. It's very cute. And the greenhouse manager said to me, knowing my fascination for conifers, said, hey, Catherine, you want to dig into this and see if you can figure out why we only got one? Because it seems like we could use some improvement in our protocols. And of course, I was really, really excited to take this on. For those of you who don't know, my master's project also involved seed germination in an endangered conifer species. And I was so happy to be working with a species that was, one, not rare, and two, it didn't seem like it could possibly be as finicky as the one that I had already been spending a year of my life working on. And for those of you who are not from the South, I want to take a moment to introduce the bald cypress, Taxodium distichum, which is a southeastern endemic conifer. And you can see from the distribution map, it's native to the coastal plains and Mississippi River Valley. And it is, I would say, one of the iconic species of these regions because it is, one, dominant in the coastal floodplains, and two, they're incredibly big and incredibly long-lived. There's a plant in the I think it's the Black Swamp on a nature conservancy property in North Carolina that's been documented as being 3,000 years old. And that's one of the survivors of a lot of widespread logging that's happened. The smiley face, I don't know if you can see that in my slide, but the smiley face is where I am. So we're kind of right on the edge of bald cypress, the bald cypress's native range. And if you've never been in a bald cypress swamp, I gotta tell you, it is an experience. Because they are one of the few plants that can survive widespread flooding, they tend to form their own natural community, which is almost entirely bald cypress. And you can see this is it from a cypress swamp I visited in eastern Maryland on the western shore. And it's every tree you see in this shot is a bald cypress. And one of the things you can also see, because the water level is low because it was dry, is the cypress knees. Nobody really knows what they do or why, but they're one of the classic signs of bald cypress swamp, is that there are all these knees all over the place. But bald cypresses can also survive high water levels and constant water levels. These are trees growing in the outflow of Merchant Mill Pond State Park. So they're subject to continual water, and they do just fine. And they can outcompete pretty much anything else in the region, and that's kind of their niche. So you don't usually see bald cypresses growing in the uplands in North Carolina, always in the lowland floodplains where nothing else can really live. And when I said they can survive high water levels, I really do mean that. This is the actual mill pond in eastern North Carolina, and every tree you see in here is also a bald cypress, and they are just fine. They form their own little islands. And part of the reason I forgot to mention why they're called bald cypress is because they're actually deciduous. So they shed their leaves in the fall and regrow new ones in the spring. And because there are so many of them concentrated into one place, the tannins from their leaves turn the water a black tea color. And so these are known as black water swamps or black water rivers. And again, it's one of the iconic features of the Southeast. But bald cypresses are also really valuable in horticultural context because they are very fast growing, very long lived, very vigorous, and very healthy. So this is a tree growing outside my old dorm at St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. And as you can see, it's not a swamp, but it's doing just fine. And you can also see that there are no knees because it's not actually growing in standing water at all. So even though bald cypresses are native to floodplains, they really don't need it to grow, which is one of the really fascinating things about them for me. So my first step in trying to figure out what is going on with bald cypress germination was to consult the USDA Woody Plant Seed Manual. And this is available for free online. It's a 1,000-page document. It is very thorough, and they have a list of not every woody plant tree species in the United States, but most of them. So there are a lot of different reference volumes. This is one I highly recommend because it's so thorough, and it has just kind of a general summary of the literature related to seed germination, including a lot of pictures. So it's really handy to consult. And if you're working on a woody plant seed germination project, I definitely recommend it. So I read through all the literature and started to get a feel for, okay, I think I know what I'm doing. And so the next step was actually to go out and collect bald cypress seeds. And because bald cypresses are not native to my area, I was focusing mostly on cultivated plants, just kind of around Durham, North Carolina. And part of the reason I did that was because, one, they were convenient, and two, for this project, I just needed a large quantity of seeds. I wasn't looking at specific genetic lineages or provenance. I just really needed a bunch of seeds that I could do experiments on. And so for that, it was for a restoration project for conservation purposes or looking to preserve a specific ecotype, I probably would have needed to go out and collect wild trees. But for this project, it really didn't matter what their lineage was. So that's important to mention. And I had a lot of adventures collecting bald cypress seeds, even in a relatively urban and developed area where they were easily accessible. But time is short, so I just want to sum it up with this meme that I made. It's going to give you an idea of what I was looking for. And so at the top, you can see, it's a little bit blurry, but you can see the cones are green, and you don't want that. What you want is seeds when they're at the stage at the bottom where they're started to turn brown. They haven't completely fallen apart yet because it's a pain to pick them up off the ground. And you can see, I don't know if you can see it in the picture, but they've just started to develop these little cracks. And the cracks means that you can easily split it open. If you harvest the seeds before they crack like that, then they won't open at all. They'll just be fused shut and you'll be stuck with this green globe thing that won't actually open. So this was in mid-November in Durham, and one of the challenges that I had was trying to figure out when exactly they would be ready, because I didn't want to miss it. I didn't want to be too early and I didn't want to be too late, which meant going to all of my sites over and over again over the entire length of the fall, because I wasn't sure exactly when the magic moment would be. And so that's something to plan into any seed collecting project that you do, is just, you're going to have to make repeated visits, especially the first year when you don't actually know what it is that you're looking for or when phenologically that's going to happen. So I collected a bunch of seeds, or cones, I should say, because then I had to play my favorite game, plant propagation game, which is, where's the seed? So I broke open all the cones, spread them out, let them dry because they were still a little bit wet and moist. And bald cypress cones are filled with this very sticky resin. So I had to oil my hands down to get it off. Otherwise, everything I touched got this sort of piney resin all over them. But I was breaking up all the cones, and I realized I didn't see any seeds. And I felt really dumb because, I've been through this program in botany. I thought I knew everything about plants, and I cannot find, for the life of me, I cannot figure out where the seeds are. But fortunately, the Woody Plant Manual had some help for me there. They had this map of this diagram of the bald cypress seed explaining, okay, actually, so instead of being separate from the cone scales like they are in many conifers, the seed is actually fused into the scales. And so that was why I couldn't find them, was because they were inside the scales. And so I said, okay. And I went to the dissecting scope and I picked up a little razor and I started cutting open the seeds just to see, okay, if the seeds are actually where I think they should be, I should start seeing embryos. They were not there. Most of the seeds that I cut open were empty. And that was kind of unexpected. So there was a space, there was a little hollow in these seeds where there should have been an embryo, but there wasn't anything at all. And eventually, so I kept cutting, and I kept cutting, and I cut through a lot of seeds, and eventually I started to see, okay, there are a few seeds here and there with viable embryos, but most of them, in fact, are actually not setting viable seed at all. So I started to think, okay, maybe the problem is that the bald cypress seed that was collected in previous years just didn't have a lot of viable seed in it. And it seems like, based on the literature, that bald cypresses also have mast years in a way that's similar to oaks, which makes sense because they're in they grow in monotypic stands, and maybe they're trying to avoid seed predators. Like there's little gall wasp that I did find a few of those that had parasitized viable seeds. And then also it may just be that they need large quantities of bald cypresses to set viable seeds. A lot of the populations that I collected from, they were in a horticultural setting. They weren't these huge forests. And so it seems like maybe if there were just one or two, there might not be a ton of viable seed. So that was really interesting and also unexpected, because you can't germinate what you don't have. And there also really wasn't a good way to distinguish between which seeds had embryos and which didn't without cutting them open. So, and once you cut it open, you can't really germinate it. So it felt a little counterproductive. So what I decided to do was take them, stratify them all, and I would sort it out later in the spring. And so stratification is a process where it's a very simple formula. You take water, cold, time, and you put them all together, and if you're lucky, you come out with trees. So seeds like bald plants like bald cypress, which have very thick scales and cones, the water cannot get to the embryo for it to germinate without somehow making it through the seed coat. And so there are a lot of different ways you can break the seed coat. You can actually cut them with a razor. You can use boiling water or sulfuric acid. But really, if you're doing a large volume of seeds, especially seeds as knobbly and unpredictable as bald cypress, the easiest way to do it is to put them in a Ziploc bag full of moist sand or anything that will hold moisture but not actually mildew. Label the bag and put it in the fridge for 3 months, and then take it out and sow it. So that's what I did. But once I had done that, I had time to work on other projects because it was going to take me 3 months before I was going to even know if I had viable results. And here's an example of, at the North Carolina Botanical Garden, they like to use milk jugs, which is a great way if you just have a couple of seeds, or you're trying to do a project cheaply. They set these outside, and they serve as mini cold frames. They already have ventilation built in with the hole at the top, and you can flip them open to water them very easily. And you just kind of let them sit outside. The freeze-thaw cycle happens naturally. They're a little bit bulky, so they make more sense if you have a lot of space. I really like the Ziploc bag in the fridge, but I also have a fridge that's kind of devoted entirely to my plant projects. So, just something to think about if you are doing this project yourself. So I had a lot of time while I was waiting for the bald cypress seeds to stratify. And I decided I was also going to work on Dawn redwood as a side project, Metasequioa glyptostrobiodes. And Dawn redwood is a fascinating conifer from China that is eerily identical to, I wouldn't say identical, but it is, from a distance, if you don't already know, you would say, hey, is that a bald cypress over there, or a Dawn redwood? So I ran into these a lot when I was looking for bald cypress seeds in Durham. And because they are so similar, and because I'm a sucker for conifers, and because I was already collecting seeds anyway, I decided to pick up a few bald cypress cones and just grow them, just to see what happens. Little bit of background about Dawn redwoods. This genus was first discovered through the fossil record, and everybody thought they were extinct until the 1940s. Western botanists started to hear about some plants in China that somebody had discovered that were actually alive, and they went out and looked, and yeah, sure, they were there. And they immediately started propagating them. The Arnold Arboretum in Boston sent a couple expeditions out. They started propagating them and growing them in the hort trade. And so they're very popular in botanic gardens for many of the same reasons that bald cypress is, because they are long-lived, they're very beautiful, very iconic. They're also deciduous, so they lose their leaves over the winter. And you can also purchase them very easily. These are some, the left-hand lower left is some potted seedlings that I saw at Winter Tour Estates in Delaware. And again, the North Carolina Piedmont is very far away from China, but they do just fine here. They really love it. They're very tolerant of a wide range of conditions, from uplands to floodplains, like the bald cypress. So I like to think of the Dawn redwood as it's not exactly the counterpart, but it's ecologically, it kind of fulfills a similar, and horticulturally, it fills a similar niche. So this is what Dawn redwood seeds look like. And you can see the cones have already kind of split, and the seeds are kind of scattered around. So the seeds are very small, they're very flighty, they're not fused to the cone scales at all. And because they don't have a thick seed coat, they don't need stratification. And because the seed coat is so thin, this is from the USDA Woody Plant Manual, all you have to do to see if a Dawn redwood seed is viable is literally hold it up to the light. It's that easy. I was so mad. So I sowed them, I sowed a handful of them, thinking, okay, what's gonna happen? I had plants in 3 weeks, and this is what they look like. So the greenhouse manager took this photo for me since I haven't been able to get over to the greenhouse recently. Took this photo for me at the end of April. So they're doing just fine. And meanwhile, before the COVID-19 outbreak, I was able to go to the greenhouse in February and pull the seeds out, the bald cypress seeds out, and sow them in a flat just to kind of see, okay, what do I get? And then this is what they look like at the end of April, at the same time that Matt took the previous shot. So, okay, we're doing better here. It's not one. We got more than one, so we already exceeded our goals. But it's not great either. So this implies that there's nothing wrong with our protocols. It's just that there's not a ton of viable seeds. And like I said, you can't germinate what isn't there. But the irony of this rare plant from China being so easy to grow, so instantaneous compared to this very common Southeastern native was just so striking to me. And it's really just, it's just really amazing how that works. So what? I mean, you guys are from all over the place. Maybe you live in Vermont, maybe you live in the Pacific Northwest, you know, you're probably not going to grow bald cypress or Dawn redwood. So why should you care? And so I think one of the takeaways from my project is just that this is a long game. You are going to have to plant propagate from seed, you're going to have to be really patient. And the first year, you are not going to know what's going on because no matter how much you read the literature, how detailed the literature is, the plants don't read the manuals and they won't necessarily follow the rules. So you don't know necessarily in your ecosystem when you're going to be able to collect. So you're going to have to make multiple trips. The first year, you know, things may go wrong. You don't know what you're doing. And so you're just going to have to plan for the first year, especially of, you know, do it in the sense of adventure rather than I really need results. And that sort of leads to my next point, which is do not expect the plants to cooperate. You are going to spend a lot of time, depending on the species, looking at things under a microscope. But this is not bald cypress. This is actually oak leaf hydrangea. But the same principle applies. And you're going to find that a lot of plants don't set seed or they have fruit or capsules, but there's nothing inside. And they may not set any seed at all one year. They may set a lot of seed the next year. They may not be in places that are easy to get to. So you should just plan on things not going to plan and the plants being cantankerous and having weird requirements that may or may not be obvious from either the literature or the superficial biology. So third, ecological context is helpful, but it's not destiny. So just because bald cypresses are found in the wild in these floodplains doesn't mean that you have to have a floodplain to grow them. I think it's really easy, especially for ecologists, to get so hung up on, well, the plant grows here in the wild, therefore it needs these conditions. But that's actually not the case. A lot of plants are much more versatile than we give them credit for. And the only way to find out is through experimentation. So we plant things and sometimes they die. And sometimes it works. And you can guess, often you can make guesses based on the ecology and on wild populations, but you don't really know until you do it. So that's something that's important to keep in mind is that, read the literature, but also just sort of take it with a grain of salt that it may or may not apply to your project or your situation or your landscape. And then fourth, the other thing is that rare doesn't always mean hard to grow. This is from Germany. These are Dawn redwoods used to line a road. Dawn redwoods are so easy to grow. They are so rare in the wild. There is no correlation between their rarity and their difficulty to grow. And I think we often have this idea that rare plants are like very delicate flowers. I think orchids especially. But there are a lot of orchids that are very easy to grow. And there are a lot of common plants that are actually very hard to germinate from seed, or I shouldn't say hard, very challenging to grow from seed. So that's also something to keep in mind, is that, you know, you could be working with a rare plant, but it does beautifully in gardens and it takes over, or like it just grows really well. And again, there's no way to know until you actually are in there working with the plant. So in conclusion, if you only take one thing away from my presentation, it would be this: to grow more plants, because there are so many problems in the world, and so many of them we can solve, or at least help mitigate, by growing more plants. So thank you very much.